Keisha Lance Bottoms joining us now. Thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start off with a little bit of news of the day that came out. We want to set the record straight here. You say you resigned from the White House, correct? President Trump says that you, along with others, were fired from your role. Let's set the record straight here. And why do you think President Trump called you out by name?
Well, I get quite tickled each time I have to repeat the story. I resigned January 4th. I sent a letter to President Biden thanking him for the opportunity to serve on the President's Export Council. And I made my resignation date effective January 20th. And so to answer your question, why Donald Trump singled me out at 1:30 a.m. following his historic inauguration, putting me in the category of a retired military general, a man who's feeding displaced people in Los Angeles, former envoy to Iran, I don't know. I like to think that I'm in great company, but I can't begin to tell you why President Trump does any of the things that he does, but he did. And what was really interesting about it, when he campaigned, he talked about reducing the price of eggs on day one and ending the war in Ukraine on day one. So there were all these expectations, and instead he sent a social media text supposedly firing me from a job that didn't pay me and a job that I had already resigned from.
What exactly was this role, and why did you decide to do it? As we know, you've served several roles with the Biden administration as an advisor while he was in the White House and on his campaign.
So I was senior advisor to the president for public engagement. That role ended. That was a role inside of the White House. I had an office in the West Wing. This was a role, it's a President's Export Council comprised of leaders across the country, business leaders, labor leaders, advising the president on trade and all things related to our trade policy. I was also serving as chair of the FirstNet Authority, which is the board that oversees the FirstNet network, which is a network that has been put into place for our public safety folk across the country. And I made the decision that I didn't want politics to interfere with the important work, specifically with the FirstNet Authority. So I made the decision to resign from the FirstNet Authority, and at the time I was considering that resignation, decided to also resign from the President's Export Council. I served under President Biden, very proud of my service under President Biden, and it was time to put a period at the end of that season.
I want to ask you about, we talked about his day one. We saw several executive orders and actions coming out. Day two, there was a notice sent out to heads of federal agencies as a message saying, you know what, we're going to start winding back and eventually getting rid of the diversity, equity, and inclusion offices here in the federal government. As we know, as mayor, you were a champion of DEI programs. My question for you is, do you think that, and I have to say this as well, President Trump has said he wants the country to now be merit-based. Do you agree that the decisions made at the federal government level, and probably even the state levels now, should solely be merit-based?
DEI programs are not contrary to merit-based programs or anyone being there on their own merit. When you look at DEI programs, that's about letting more people in, not keeping people out. It means that you are evening the playing field, that you're giving people the tools and resources, whatever it may be, so that they can fairly compete. DEI is also not just limited to race. You talk about women when you're talking about DEI programs. It may be someone who's coming from a rural community, someone who's economically disadvantaged. It's just about making sure that the playing field is level. I think that what President Trump is doing is, once again, I think he's spending a lot of time on theatrics. The DEI programs from the federal government have not been at the expense of anyone having a fair opportunity. an opportunity to compete for a job, to be rewarded for the good work that they have done. It's just been about making sure that we are being thoughtful about everyone having an opportunity to get their foot inside the door and to thrive.
What is your message to him? And really, we're talking about the federal level, but we know that this trickles down. We know that there are some very staunch Trump supporters at the state level and then even at the local level. But what is your message to the guy up top, to President Trump today?
My message would be just to remember that you are a president for all America at this point. I don't think there's anybody who wants to see the president of the United States fail. But in succeeding, that means that you are thinking about not just the people who voted for you, but the people who didn't vote for you. How can we move our country forward? If people are concerned about economic issues, then address those issues. If you think you can do better with inflation, if you believe that you can stop the war in Ukraine, if you believe that you can improve immigration policies, whatever the things may be, do it for all people and not just the people that voted for you. But what's really concerning to me when you look at the pardons given to the January 6th prisoners, these were people who were attacked police officers, violent offenders. And there's now talk about them coming to the White House. And it just sends such a troubling message to people across this country and especially to our children. What is the penalty for doing bad things when you can do it and get away with it and the President of the United States says it's okay?
I want to bring things back here locally to you. We know that you've had a long career in politics. Now that there is a new administration, are you retiring from politics?
I've never retired from politics. From leaving the mayor's office to my time going into the White House, my involvement with the DNC as a party. And I always said when I left the mayor's office, that was not the end of my career in politics. So I'm keeping all of my options open. We know that there are races that will be taking place in the state of Georgia in 2026. I'm paying attention to what those opportunities may be. And, I'm in prayer and discussion with my family, and I'll just say stay tuned.
Do you think you see yourself more on the campaign side or in the driver's seat for these upcoming elections?
Driver's seat.
Okay. All right. Last question for you, just a message to those looking ahead to 2025, specifically stateside, locally. Just a word of advice to new lawmakers and those existing lawmakers that are coming in that are going to have a lot of power. As we know, President Trump says he wants to put a lot of power back into the states. That'll start under the Gold Dome, but then trickle down to our local jurisdictions. I
would say whatever your party affiliation, find those things that you can find common ground with people who may not think like you, they may not look like you, they may not be from your community. My experience, one of the biggest champions I had over at the state capitol was the Speaker, David Ralston. On paper, you wouldn't think that this guy from Blue Ridge, this staunch Republican leader, and I would have anything in common. But we found common ground on a lot of things. And we agreed that what was good for Atlanta was good for the state of Georgia. Even with all of my differences I had with Governor Kemp, there were a lot of things that we did agree on. So I would just say, reach across the aisle. Don't peg people one way or the other. You may find allies in unlikely places, and I say that to Democrats and to Republicans as well.
Right. Mayor Lance Bottoms, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time, and we hope to have you back, especially when you decide what you're going to announce.
Yeah, it's great. As I shared, this was my first visit after I won mayor. I came here the very next morning, bright and early, so it's great to be back.
Well, we were happy to have you back anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.